Hello, everyone. I can see a number of people streaming in for our webinar tonight about stormwater management. We're going to wait just another minute or two to see if others show up, but I see we have quite a few people here, so we're happy to see you. I have just a minute or two before 6. We are supposed to start at 6, so we'll try to start on time, but we'll wait that minute or two for other people to come in. And there's Councilmember Cornell. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, well, I have 6 o'clock, so we might as well get started since we have so many people here already. Thank you for coming to this. We appreciate you coming out. I am going to launch a poll right now. This poll is our demographic poll, and it's completely optional. It's really to help us figure out who we're reaching so we can determine who we're not reaching, so we can do a better job at figuring out ways to reach people that we're not necessarily getting to. So we appreciate you taking it if you don't mind. So I'll leave that going up for a few minutes while I go over these preliminary slides. But to start with, I just want to go over technology. So if you don't mind switching to the next slide. I think many people are probably familiar with Zoom at this point, but just in case, it never hurts just to kind of go over the basics. If you do want to submit a question or comment, we do have a Q&A feature right at the bottom of the screen, so you can provide a written comment that way. If you would like to speak, you can virtually raise your hand, which is also at the bottom of your screen, and you just click on that. However, if you're on the phone and don't have access to the screen, you can hit *9. So please feel free to do that, and we'll look out for your hands and call on you. We're going to go through a whole presentation, so we'll wait until the end until we get to questions and comments. But you're welcome to submit something in writing throughout it, and we'll just keep track of that. All right, next slide. We do like to put out these meeting norms, and this is just basically a reminder for us to be kind to each other. We want everybody to remember the rights and dignity of other people. So with that, we ask you to commit to learning and avoid speculation, critique ideas and not people. Be thoughtful about your language so that this is a respectful place and that everybody feels comfortable being here. And that if there is inappropriate written or verbal comment language, you can be asked to be removed from the meeting. I haven't encountered that yet. I hope this is not the first meeting where that happens. So far so good. Let's keep it up. And that brings us up to introductions and who's here tonight. So we have Brian Steglitz here, who's our Public Service Area Administrator. We also have Jennifer Lawson, who's our Water Quality Manager. And then Michelle Bennett, who's a community engagement specialist, along with me, who's going to be managing the questions at the end. And we're both keep our eye out for questions that come in through the Q&A, as well as hands being raised. And then myself, Heather Seiferth. We also have a couple of council members who I think Councilmember Cornell is already here. And I imagine Councilmember Briggs will be coming along soon if she's not already here. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Steglitz.
Thank you, Heather, and welcome everybody. I'm glad to see we have a number of folks here today. I'm going to just quickly walk through the agenda, and then I'm going to pass it over to our subject matter expert to go through some background information on stormwater management. But initially we'll talk about why we're all here today. I think most people know, but I'll touch on a couple points briefly. Again, then I'll be turning it over to Jen Lawson, who will talk about stormwater management. And then go through some of the history of the feedback we've received from this area on drainage related issues. And many of you are part of that history, so I'm sure you'll be familiar, but we want to make sure that that you all understand that what we know, and we'll be just sharing some highlights from that history. And then we'll also have an opportunity, as Heather mentioned, to the end to hear comments and thoughts. We'll have a couple questions that we'll put out there to maybe spur some feedback from all of you, and then we'll be wrapping up. Next slide. Thanks. So why are we here today? So this session was put together at the request of Councilmember Briggs. She's been hearing from feedback from some of you folks, I'm sure, and we wanted to pull some information together. So one, we need to do our homework and get familiar with the history. We have some new players. I've been in this role since January, so I needed to get up to speed on what some of the stormwater management issues were in this space. So as part of this presentation, what you'll see is some background on stormwater, the city stormwater management program, and how we think about stormwater. We'll give you an opportunity, as I said, to answer questions. And then we really want to set some realistic expectations for how we're going to proceed, and I'll capture that at the end so you understand our roadmap moving forward as we address some of the issues that we're going to be talking about this evening. So with that, thank you again for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Jen Lawson.
Thanks all. Checking audio, it works. So stormwater management is a pretty broad term. And in the city of Ann Arbor, we look at stormwater management very holistically across the entire city, not focusing on one specific area, recognizing that all of our stormwater in the city does flow to the Huron River, which is near and dear to all of our hearts. But what the city does to manage stormwater is more of a system approach, looking at stormwater, including sediment, including flood mitigation programs, to not only look at the quantity of water managed, but the quality of water managed as well. And looking specifically on how it impacts our community, both negatively and potentially looking at the river as, the stormwater as an asset and a resource for our river. We plan and manage a lot of different ways for stormwater. Many of it are kind of what we would say the typical infrastructure that you're used to thinking about. It's the pipes underground. It's the catch basins that are along the curb and gutter. It's underground storage. There's actually quite a series of underground storage tanks underneath the city that we use to detain stormwater when we have large rain events. Pervious pavement is another one that allows stormwater to infiltrate into the road surface. When we start thinking about green infrastructure, it's a little more of utilizing the tools that Mother Nature gave us. So those are our creeks and our streams, more along a conveyance line. Street trees absorb a lot of water. They allow for infiltration of rainwater. And from a built standpoint, we can mimic what Mother Nature has provided by creating detention basins, rain gardens, infiltration basins to kind of capture the water where it falls and allow it to slowly seep back into the earth as opposed to flooding downstream neighbors. And then the other one that people don't necessarily think of when they think of stormwater management is the roads, the right-of-way, the curb lines, the ditches that we have within the right-of-way. Those all make up part of our stormwater management system as well. And just so a few quick examples. The gray infrastructure is those pipes underground, which many of us aren't lucky enough to see, but we know they're down there underground. Green infrastructure is more of those rain gardens that I said that are landscape aesthetic quality. And the public right-of-way, that's a great example of a ditch along, this is a paved road, but a ditch can also be along a dirt road. Ditches are meant mostly for conveyance and some infiltration. Now, when we think about how we manage stormwater, stormwater management cannot control, and I'll use the word control lightly. We cannot control all of the rainfall that we receive. There's always a bigger storm. Since the 1980s, we, as a national standard, we utilize what's called the 10-year storm. And that actually is what is considered the 10% annual chance of that storm occurring. Older stormwater pipes were designed to pass the 5-year event. So again, that's the 20% chance in any given year that that storm may occur. In those instances, we may receive storms that are much larger. And so the streets and low-lying areas are expected to have water in major rain events. If the ground is frozen, that absolutely is going to happen because the water cannot seep into the ground. At this time, we still utilize the 10% annual chance storm. That being said, we are looking and we're working with NOAA numbers and GLISA, which is the Great Lakes Integrated Science Institute over at the university, on what climate change is going to be impacting for stormwater management. We recognize that climate change has definitely impacted the kind of storm we get. They are much stronger intensity. They are sometimes for a shorter duration, but when you get a deluge of rainwater, your pipes function differently. And so we are utilizing newer technologies and better science and data for stormwater management of our system. So just to give a little bit of an idea or context of what stormwater assets are in the city, you can see here there's a few different shades of color on this map. This is a map of the city of Ann Arbor. North is up. We see the Huron River flowing through the center. The royal blue are the city's stormwater pipes. There are 231 miles of stormwater pipe in the city that we manage. Those are all also flowing into and through pipes that are owned by the university, which is the teal color, pipes that are red, which are privately owned, pipes that are purple. The purple doesn't show up great on my screen. That's the Washtenaw County Water Resource Commissioner's office. And then the green is MDOT, so those are actually under the jurisdiction of the state. That's both Huron, Washtenaw, and then the freeways that surround. And there's a few of the smaller ones that are considered waters of the state under this jurisdiction of EGLE, which is the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. So there's a lot of players when it comes to managing stormwater. Our pipes, as I mentioned, all do flow into the Huron River. But there's another way to also look at stormwater and how it functions. And that's what we would call a creek shed, also commonly known as a drainage area. These areas have creeks that in all but one of these instances, the creek is still functioning as a creek. It's open to the natural air. There's flora, there's fauna, there's fish, there's frogs and toads, and we see them as recreational resources. That being said, all of the water within these creek sheds flows into just that drainage area. The one that I want to say an exception for is Allen Creek in the salmon color, if you will. And that actually used to be a creek until the 1920s. And then the city of Ann Arbor, due to development pressures, put it underground. So the creek is still there. It just doesn't function exactly like a creek anymore. We don't have the same flora and fauna because everything is underground. Next slide. So focusing in a little bit more on the issue of unpaved roads. Of the 500 plus miles of roads in the city, there are 12.5 miles of unpaved roads that the city manages and maintains. There are additional miles that are either maintained privately or maintained by the county. But you can see those roads here in the orangish color. They aren't exactly geographically located in one area or another. So they're kind of spread out throughout the city. Many of them are, they were built before they were annexed into the city, or they were built when they were out in the township. And so the development standards have been a little bit different on those. For tonight, we want to focus a little bit on the purple circle, which is what we call the Evergreen neighborhood, or the Valley Subdivision. Scioto Hills is another name, but you can see there's a significant portion of unpaved roads that are geographically located in this one area. In fact, the unpaved roads in this area make up almost a third of all of the city maintained unpaved streets. So many of you are probably trying to look for your house and figure out where your house is. If we were in person, I'd ask you to put a pin where your house is, but just recognizing that there's a significant amount of unpaved roads, and then Dexter kind of bisecting this area as a paved road. I want to zoom in a little bit also. I had mentioned creek sheds. What's really unique about this area is that you're actually in two different creek sheds. So the water that may fall on one side of Glenwood isn't going to be the same as water that falls on Pinewood, even though it might be a neighbor that you know, and And, you know, it looks like it's probably about the same area. So the water that is in the Honey Creek shed, that water flows through the Sister Lakes area out to Honey Creek, and then it flows ultimately to the Huron River. Allen Creek is different. Allen Creek is the one that I mentioned that was underground. That water flows from this area to the east, underground out to the Allen Creek outlet near Argo Dam. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the history. And for many of you, this may not be new information, but we did want to make sure that from a timeline standpoint and from a context standpoint, we're all kind of understanding the same history about this Evergreen neighborhood area. So in the 1960s, drainage issues were first brought to the attention of the city. In the 70s, there was some studies done, potentially looking at some drainage options. However, City Council decided to halt that, receiving opposition from the Sister Lakes Association. Now, moving into the 80s, what really was becoming very apparent is that much of this area still wasn't even in the city. It was out in the township. It was very difficult to start installing infrastructure for parcels that were not even in the city. So there were some temporary solutions proposed. And then fast forwarding into the 90s, there was a study that was completed. There were 3 options given for some solutions, and then there were some public meetings held, and there was a resounding, I'll use the terms, overwhelming desire to discontinue pursuit of the installation. In fact, there was a petition received from this neighborhood outlining reasons that the project should not move forward. The residents at that time wanted the neighborhood left as it was. So the city took some steps back. We looked at potentially using dry wells, working with neighbors on private property. But what we were really hearing from the neighborhood is that people were not experiencing issues with drainage, or they just wanted things to stay the same. Next slide. So continuing on into the late 90s and the early 2000s, there was a stormwater pipe that was put down Glenwood, and that also constructed a detention basin to the far south. It's actually behind the pet daycare over at Maple Village, is one of the detention areas proposed in a previous study. Continuing on to the late 2000s, some more work on dry wells was attempted. The difficulty in this area is that it's clay soils, and the dry wells were not functioning as designed just because of those really poor soils. Most recently in 2018, the city administrator requested our engineering group to kind of address some of these remaining localized drainage issues, because we are still hearing from many of you. And there was again a lot of localized concerns. However, there are drainage issues that will happen unless something is done on more of a watershed-wide scale. Really quick, and I hope that you guys didn't worry about me rushing through those slides. This presentation will be available online. So I know I breezed through a lot of that language. Not to worry, the slides will be made available online after the presentation. So since 2016, the city has received more than 400 calls or emails from this neighborhood area, specifically regarding either road condition, whether it's the road needs to be graded, there are potholes, the roads are muddy, to drainage issues, standing water on the road, standing water on private property, standing water in the public right of way. So we recognize that we are receiving calls and concerns about that issue. And then just to give some context, these are some of the photos that we receive. Many of you might go, hey, that's my yard. These pictures were received in the February timeframe. So when the ground was frozen, water could not infiltrate. And so there really was nowhere for this water to go. You can see even in the bottom right photo that the road is frozen. There's still ice on the road. So that is something that does need to be addressed. And then on the flip side, we also receive drainage complaints and drainage concerns about standing water on the sides of the road. You can see these pictures were taken in the summertime, spring or fall, but again, the roads, there is no ice. But again, there's puddling, there's ponding on the sides of the road. So I've given some context about what we've had, what we've heard. I'd like to turn it over to Brian now, if we could, please.
Thank you, Jen. Excuse me. I'm going to wrap up this portion of the presentation, and then we will also have an opportunity for you to hear from the two council members in the ward if they want to make some comments. So I just wanted to mention that we'll provide them that opportunity, and I didn't mention that at the onset. So what's moving forward, and why is this situation now that we're in different from maybe what has been communicated to you all in the past? And what are we committing to as a city in terms of moving forward and addressing the concerns and issues that have been raised? First, we are committed. First we're here. We want to make sure that we're listening and hear your thoughts and acknowledge that we are aware of the and have been logging the calls as Jen illustrated before. So we're not ignoring the issue, but moving forward, we will be identifying funds in our next fiscal year budget to do a drainage study in this area and look at what opportunities there are that exist that could address the issues that are illustrated in the photos that Jen shared. So what's different about this than what we've done in the past? Well, one is that we're taking a little bit more of a bigger picture approach and looking at this as a system. When you're looking at how you manage and deal with stormwater, it's not just we have water ponding, how do we get it away, but we need to think about where is the water source and where is it initiating, and make sure that maybe we need to deal with things where it lies initially. So there may be some other opportunities and tools that may have not been evaluated in the past, and we want to make sure that we give an opportunity to look at some of these other things as we evaluate what options potentially exist. Of course, in the past, some of the things that came up were paving the roads and putting in buried stormwater infrastructure, but that wasn't a palatable solution for everyone in the neighborhood. So at this time, we will be looking at and investigating additional alternatives. So it's not just going to be the same solution is we need to pave the roads and we need to put in buried stormwater infrastructure. So there'll be new potential solutions that will be evaluated. At this point, we can't, we haven't begun this study yet, so we can't tell you what those are, but we want to make sure that we're capturing the suite of options that are available and also engaging the community as we're doing this. So there will be opportunities once we initiate a project for community engagement. So you can share your thoughts and experiences and make sure that we capture that as we're evaluating. So the funds that we're requesting will be going to city administrator as part of our requested budget. And then that would go to city council, and they would obviously that's in their area or their purview to approve the budget. So assuming all of that moves forward in fiscal year 23, we would begin to study this and develop solutions. So what does that mean for the short term? Well, in the short term, there's things that we have been doing and we're going to continue to do. We will continue to do dust control in the area. We'll continue to do grading as needed in order to ensure that there's not potholes that are filling with water and that we're maintaining the grades of all of the gravel roads in this space. We can also, we clean out catch basins. We try to maintain ditches if they exist. So these are the kinds of things that we're going to be dealing with in the short term. Is this going to address all of the issues that have been experienced? No, but we really can't develop solutions until we have the opportunity to complete these drainage studies. So I want to make sure that we're clear and manage expectations that this is the plan and this is the schedule. And in the short term, we're probably going to continue to see some of that until we can identify what solutions may be able to be put in place to abate those issues. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Let me see. I think before we hear from the council members, we have a couple of questions that we are teeing up for you to respond to. So the first question is, what are the questions that you want us to make sure that we're addressing in this study? And I'll give you folks an opportunity to respond. And I think at this point, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Heather. I might have, or Michelle, I might have overstepped my bounds there. So
that's okay. No, you're right on track here. What we're asking is to really focus on this question. As Brian mentioned, the funds are still being requested, so we're in the very preliminary stages of this process. So you will have time during a public engagement series to share personal stories about your property. What we're looking for right now is to help shape the study. So you guys are being involved at the very beginning of this process, and you can use your Q&A feature here to submit your answers to this. What are the questions that you want answered in the study? And we can use this information when we go to, issue a request for proposal and work with contractors. We can relay this information to them and let them know that we've already spoken with the community about this topic. So again, if you've called in, then you can do *9 to raise your hand. Otherwise, you can go to the bottom of your screen, click on the QA feature and submit your answer to this question. I see some questions are coming in. We're going to have time for us to go over those as well. But for right now, we're going to focus on this question. So let's see here.
Yeah, so yeah, so we have one comment about to what degree do rain gardens help for the study? And let's see, and would drainage ditches help alleviate the problem? So those are things that we can have addressed in the study.
I would like to jump in really quick. Thank you, Jim and Cheryl. My screen is cracked. It's not dirty. My screen is cracked. My apologies. If I sit over here, you can sort of see me. But thank you so much, though.
Yeah, whether raising the sidewalk would help is another question.
So Heather, can I jump in on a few of these questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I'm going to just maybe start at the top and give some initial thoughts on some of these, if that's
Sure.
okay. There's a question about how does water get from the Allen Creekshed neighborhood into the underground network. I mean, in areas where there's not formal buried infrastructure, water can flow through surface or groundwater infiltration. So those would be the primary methods. But in terms of specifically how does it get from one place to another, that's part of the reason for the drainage study. So we wouldn't be able to answer those questions in detail now, but the water is either infiltrating, running across the surface, eventually getting to buried infrastructure, and then if it's flowing, that's the creek shed that it's going to go into based on the maps that we illustrated earlier. Is there any idea on what the cost per household of installing stormwater drains would be? These are things that we would be absolutely investigating and developing more information on as part of the study. So we're not able to answer that now, and we haven't been able to answer that. So the study will be able to address those questions on costs. There's a question on, a comment on being in favor of paving the roads. I'm not sure there is a question there. Let me keep going down the list. The question about rain gardens, again, there's lots of tools in our toolbox that we can use in order to address and manage stormwater, and rain gardens are one great tool. So how effective they will be and how much water that they can absorb will also be something that we evaluate as part of the drainage study. New drainage ditches, again, something that we will also be looking at. So we need to look at where the water falls and then how we can convey it to where we want it to go. So ditches are a very common tool that are used in areas like this where there isn't buried stormwater infrastructure. So we would be looking at that as well.
We do have one question about how the study differentiates from previous studies. Is that something that you're able to address, Brian or Jen?
So I'll start, and Jen, you can jump in if you have something additional to add. I'm not that familiar with the previous study, so I can't explain exactly what happened there. Maybe Jen is able to, but we're going to be taking a little bit of a watershed approach in this study, which is a little bit different, I think, than what we've done in the past. So we're going to look at this area in general and determine, again, how can we manage holistically the water that will fall in this space and try to direct it to where we want to go. In the past, I think it was a little bit of a narrower focus. So I think we're going to be a little bit broader. And I think that the other big piece of this is that we're going to be looking at some different tools that weren't looked at in the past. So are there things we realize that in the past, part of the reason why we haven't moved forward with implementing changes in this area was because there wasn't really consensus about what solutions would be most effective, or people wanted to maintain like the rural feel of this neighborhood, and we're not supportive of putting in roads. So these are the kinds of things that we're going to be dealing with. We'll have sort of a suite of solutions that we develop, paving roads, putting in buried stormwater, maybe one end of the spectrum, but we'll have a lot of other things at the other end of the spectrum that may be less costly and maintain the feel of the neighborhood if that's really important to the people to all of you who are living there right now. So we're really going to need to get that type of feedback as we develop these options moving forward.
Brian, you hit it on the head. Previous studies focused on getting rid of the water, and so really conveyance away. We're looking at, it's almost a philosophical shift where we want to look at where the water is falling and hold it there. So whether that's storage or infiltration in the upstream areas, it's again, more holistic approach to stormwater management rather than getting rid of it, because that really involves a lot of the gray infrastructure that I had previously spoken about.
And related to what you just talked about, there's a question about whether these are going to be long-term solutions or just another stopgap. And I think that depends on what sort of agreement there is about the solutions. But if you wanted to speak more to that, please go ahead.
I certainly can, Heather. We're looking for long-term solutions. We're looking to make this community a little less impacted by these rain events, to make sure that there's a stormwater management solution that will significantly reduce the negative impacts that this neighborhood is experiencing. So we're not looking at stopgap by any means. There's definitely maintenance things that we could try, do, but I think that there's a lot of questions we still don't know the answers to yet.
Thanks. And then, oh, sorry, go ahead, Brian.
No, go ahead, Heather.
Oh, I was just going to suggest I could go through and just mention the other suggestions that people have about what should be studied in the study. But if you want, if you and Jen want to stop me on any of those things to talk a little bit more about it, I can do that.
I just wanted to make one comment. I see that there are several questions, sort of specific questions about, can we do this in this area? And we're not really in a position right now to answer some of these questions, unfortunately. Not to say that we won't, but some of this stuff will really be part of the work that we're going to be planning on doing. So we'll be studying some of this, and I know that maybe not be the answer that folks want to hear, but we don't want to be misleading and answering things that we just don't know the answers to some of these things now. We're going to have to investigate some of the solutions and some of the ideas that are here further before we can get back to them.
Brian, that
Right.
is actually a really good point. The questions that I'm seeing here they're literally answering the bullet that we ask. What are the questions you want answered in this study? And I'd love to take a list of every single one of these questions that you all have asked, and we're going to give those to the consultant as part of the RFP process, that this is really the outcome. And during the study, when the study starts, we will definitely be at a better place to answer these. We'll have a little more data, a little more research that's been completed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for example, so there's a number of questions about sidewalks and the impact of those. So that'll be addressed during the study. So let's see, I'm trying to see if there's other. And then whether this is managing flooding in the winter.
So we mentioned this earlier, but we realize that that's probably the most challenging time, because really we're relying on groundwater to infiltrate, or the water to infiltrate in these types of areas where we don't have pipe conveyance. And in the winter time, when the ground is frozen, obviously that's something that's not available. So again, in terms of managing expectations, we have a winter coming up, and we will be doing what we can to keep everything in good repair and maintained. But we're going to be experiencing some of the same things that we've experienced, depending upon what the weather is. And if we get a rain when the ground is still frozen, we're probably going to be seeing some ponding associated with some of those events. We have been out there a little bit earlier in the year, and we'll continue to investigate to see if there's things that we can do in terms of maintaining, the existing infrastructure to try to relieve some of that. But it's probably going to be a very small impact stopgap approach, and it's not going to really have a substantial impact on reducing the situations that we've been experiencing in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah, again, we appreciate everybody putting in all of their questions. And just so everybody knows that that Zoom records all of the questions that you've typed in. So we will have record of this, which we can pass directly along to the consultant. So with that, I'm just kind of scrolling through. We have quite a few things that people put in here, which is really great. But I think we could probably move on to the next question, Michelle, which is about you asking us questions. So why don't we start that, and we'll just keep record of what we have in here.
Right, so now we're opening it up for you all. If there's any questions about the process, about storm management in general, about different types of infrastructure, we welcome you to submit those as well, since we have Brian and Jennifer here who can try to help answer some of those questions.
One question that came in is, what does the drainage study consist of? So if we could just kind of walk through that a little bit more, that would be helpful.
I'd love to do that, Heather. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So a drainage study consists of a few different, both boots on the ground aspects, as well as interview and question answer with those people that live in the area. So there will be a series of public meetings similar to this one. We would also, at anyone's request, meet out in the field so they can maybe walk us and our consultant through what they may be experiencing. There will be survey completed. So for a couple of weeks, you'll see some field crews, most likely from the consultant, doing survey grade analysis. And so we can get a true, again, boots on the ground aspect of what the topography specifically looks like in this area. They will be identifying any infrastructure, getting the exact elevation of that infrastructure to see where the water currently falls and where it could fall. We'll also be doing soil analyses to see what infiltrative capacity any of the soils in the area could have. I previously mentioned that it's clay soils. That's based on several anecdotal responses I've had with many of you, and also our field staff who have been out there for numerous issues looking specifically at drainage, and they keep coming back to telling me there's a lot of clay soil out there. So that's kind of the research and history and data gathering component of a drainage study. And then the engineering consultant, whomever we hire, we haven't decided that yet, will then work with the information given, work with innovative stormwater best management practices, and look for opportunities to manage stormwater using a series of decision making. So if it's storage, if there's area where there aren't homes, if there's a park nearby, a large area, maybe there's some opportunity to store stormwater. Likewise, if there are ditches, or if there's a better way of conveyance that we can put in, if there are recommendations for culverts underneath driveways, a lot of those kind of nitty-gritty things will come as recommendations out of the drainage study. I would imagine timeline would probably be about 12 to 18 months, depending on the length of public engagement that we incorporate, as well as the length of field collection or data collection. Sometimes they end up wanting to go back out and do a little more detailed investigation. We also would be, from a technological standpoint, taking the survey information and putting it into the city's stormwater model to see how the pipes will function in different rain events. And so it's not just a one size fits all. As I mentioned, we receive different storm intensities, different durations. And so we can, through a computer model, actually model the exact function of how our system will function. So there's a lot of science and technology that goes into that as well. After that, there are a series of recommendations. We would work with the community to look at palatability, and what would be recommended to move forward. If it was a capital recommendation or something that needs to be built, it would then be put into the city's capital improvements plan. So that was a long kind of summary of what a drainage study will be. And for reference, you'll be seeing my face a lot.
Some specifics about it. Is there somebody that comes out and observes the actual rain snow event to incorporate real events into the study?
Yes, that is actually the stormwater modeling that I mentioned. So we actually take real rain events and plug them into the model to see how different designs would function. And we have real-time precipitation data that we have 5 locations around the city that we actually have collected at 5-minute intervals. And so we know kind of exactly how much rainfall is occurring, precipitation is occurring at any given time in the city. So real data, real models.
There are a couple questions about immediate relief. Is there anything that can be done in the meantime, like cleaning out the silt of drains or anything else for now? Or is it really that we're going to need to wait for the study to really understand the origins of the problem?
Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about the grading that has occurred in the area? So we do have a record of all of the grading that has occurred both on each street individually as well as dust treatment. So kind of both of the dirt road management. But did you want to say anything else, Brian?
Muted. There we go. I don't really think I have much to share other than what I've already shared. And we have been out in the area doing grading and dust control. I think I'm trying to think about how much time. Let me see. Someone just shared that information with me. But over the past, probably over a dozen times in this neighborhood over the past year. So the crews have been out. But that again is going to have limited impact. So, we're still going to be struggling during the thaw when the ground is still frozen and rain events. The infrastructure that is there currently is going to create the ponding that we have been seeing without making changes.
Thanks. We do have another specific question about the rainfall and the question is one of the rainfall stations in Evergreen? Okay.
It's not exactly in Evergreen. It is actually on Jackson Road, just at the upstream end of First Sister Lake. So kind of on the other side of Weber's from this neighborhood. There is a rainfall gauge, which is extremely, extremely close to the neighborhood. And we would utilize that gauge as the locale or the localized data for precipitation.
Great. Any more questions on green infrastructure itself? I know that Jen covered that quite a bit, but just wanting to make sure that everybody has an understanding of how that operates. And there's a question about the difference between other neighborhoods, Churchill Downs specifically, and then this neighborhood, about why there was work down there and not in this neighborhood.
I think well, I'll take a stab at it first, Brian, and you can kind of jump in if you like. The Churchill Downs neighborhood was identified. That fix was specifically identified as part of a drainage study for the Upper Mallets drainage area. So they, similar to what this community has, or this area has experienced, there was a significant storm that occurred. Many of you may remember the Dexter tornado in 2012. That neighborhood had extreme, I'll use the word flooding. That was extremely significant. And so that was the catalyst where there was a series of recommendations that were made to address drainage issues within that neighborhood. And similar to this neighborhood, there is no detention in that neighborhood. And so hence what you've seen as a large regional detention pond was built to address a portion of the drainage issues that Lansdowne neighborhood had experienced. So similar, there was a drainage study that occurred, and that really is the catalyst to come up with those recommendations of what needs to be built or be improved upon. And I can actually jump into the next question, Heather, if you don't mind, about what a bioswale is. Mm-hmm. A bioswale is it's a ditch that has a conveyance component to it, but it also has plantings, and so it utilizes Mother Nature's plants to uptake excess nutrients, to allow for deeper roots for more water infiltration into the groundwater. So it's kind of a multiple use tool. A bioswale both conveys the water from point A to point B, and it also allows for a significant amount of infiltration and pollutant uptake within the plant itself. So it's a good question about what a bioswale is. I can also answer the question about salt used on Dexter.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. The city actually doesn't use a significant amount of salt. In most instances, we use about a 95% sand to salt mixture. We recognize that salt is detrimental for the biota and bugs, the birds and the bees in the Huron River. So we have actually limited and significantly reduced the amount of salt that we utilize on our roads. We do a series of what we call de-icing or preliminary icing. So before a winter storm occurs, we actually go out and we pre-wet with a solution that does not necessarily have a lot of salt in it, but it lowers the freezing temperature, increases the freezing temperature. So it does not allow for ice formation on the roads. And then with that salt sand mixture, we focus mostly on utilizing that salt sand mixture on curves and on hills. So there isn't necessarily a large broad scape application of that 95%, 5% sand salt mixture. What you may be seeing them apply is that preliminary or pre-icing application to essentially prevent the ice from forming. And I will put a plug in here. In the fall, we usually have a really fantastic public works open house, and you can actually go speak with the roads experts about exactly what they use, and you can see the equipment and you can see the pre-wetting mixture and stand inside our salt dome where we, do the 95% salt mix. And it's just a little plug.
Great. Any other questions about stormwater management, the drainage study itself, or green infrastructure? Okay, I don't see anything else coming in, so maybe we can move on to the next slide. But in the meantime, I do want to mention again that we will be addressing a lot of what you put in here in the study, and we do have record of it. So I hope it's not feeling that we're being dismissive of a lot of the questions that people submitted. It's just that we will be forwarding that on to the study.
So with that, we can open it up to our two council members who have joined us this evening. So thank you for calling this meeting. I think it's been very informative, but I'll turn it over to either of you to share any closing comments.
Thanks. This is Erica Briggs, and I think my camera is disabled, which is just fine, but you can hear me. So thank you so much to staff tonight, for everybody who's here and providing a good overview of what's been going on. I'm very grateful for the willingness to sort of look at this problem anew, try to figure out how we can approach it differently than we have done in the past. And I think we're off to a good start. I'm grateful for all of the residents that are here tonight, all of your questions. I know that probably there is a frustration to some degree in this format. You're asking a lot of questions and a lot of things you're hearing that there's going to be answers in the future. But I think it's good. We're getting aired what we need to know going into this next study. I think there were some questions that were in this that were answered, but in live time, there may be others as staff kind of goes through here that we can get answers to that maybe are not relevant for the study, but we might be able to answer up front. But I know there's probably some concern about going into another winter timeframe. I saw that in some of the questions in terms of, what are we going to do in the in-between time? And I recognize that this is a issue that the neighborhood has been dealing with for decades. And for some of you, you've been there for decades experiencing it. And for others of you, you're new to the neighborhood. But I just want to let you know that I know that I will be, and Councilmember Cornell will be talking in a second, but we're going to be working hard to make sure that we are working to actually address the problems in this neighborhood, getting this into the next budget, looking for good long-term solutions for the neighborhood, so that we are, while we may not maybe seeing some of the same issues this coming winter, the city's going to be doing the best they can with the tools that we have available right now, but really looking for better solutions moving forward. So I will continue to be ready to meet with neighbors, hear what what you didn't get to voice in this meeting, conveying that forward, and advocating for you in the next budget cycle. Pass that over to Councilmember Cornell.
Thank you, Councilmember Briggs. And I want to echo all of her sentiments in totality, and also offer thanks to the city staff who I've only been on council for a couple weeks now, and the generosity of time and knowledge and bringing me up to speed on this to prepare for this conversation, and certainly our neighbors who participated tonight and really asked and contributed good thought-provoking questions, not only for us to have a study that I think meaningfully reflects what your concerns are and, you know, how we can help address what is something that has for many of you been a concern for many years is important. And that's how government works, is to take what we hear from you and to work really hard to address your concerns and make sure that the city works for you in a way that you know, makes you love living here. I will also echo what Councilmember Briggs said about please don't hesitate to reach out to talk directly about this. If you have additional questions, you know, please send us an email. Don't hesitate to reach out. And I'm really grateful that we are having this meeting and kicking this off before the budget cycle so that we can be good advocates for you as we consider what the priorities are and how to best serve this specific neighborhood and these longstanding concerns. So thank you so much.
Thank you for those comments. Jen, do you want to take this last slide here?
Yes, if I can unmute myself. Sure. I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware we do have a project website set up for drainage studies within the city of Ann Arbor. Any updates and more information, including the presentation slides for the evening, as well as the recording, will be available at the website a2gov.org/drainage studies. Information will be put there as it's made available. And when we get to a point with the budget potentially being approved to move forward with this, we will be utilizing, again, probably the same methods of communication that we used. I'm assuming many of you probably received a postcard about the meeting, but we will be utilizing this website to push information out. And again, please do not hesitate to ask. My email and phone number are on that website if there's any other further questions about the studies as they move forward.
And there is a question about whether the questions posed and answers will also be available online. So we will be, and Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, we'll be providing information about the study as that unfolds, you know, as we get closer to launching that. And then the questions that will be answered by the study, there'll be a process for the answers to be posted as the study happens.
Yes, many of the questions that were asked in tonight's presentation were exactly that. They were focused on what the study will dive into. However, many of the questions that we answered kind of in person or on screen today, there will be a part of the recording, and you know, you'll get to hear our words as we answered those questions.
All right. Well, I think that's it. We can maybe hang around for another minute or two to see if anybody has any outstanding questions about the study or what the next steps are. But otherwise, we really appreciate everybody coming tonight. We appreciate your time. We know that this is a very meaningful topic to all of you. And so we are glad to be able to talk with you about it tonight. And again, stay tuned and check in on this website where we'll be posting information as it comes along.
Yes, thank you all. I look forward to working with you in the future.
Just wanted to say thanks again to staff. This is really great.
There is a question. I'm wondering if you know if people are able to dig out the silt from existing ditches, or does that run into issues?
I think that would be a question that we could direct towards Public Works, and potentially if Mr. Mills, if you're still on, if you'd like to drop your email and we can at least have Public Works give you or contact you to further discuss that. Thank you. We'll make sure we reach out to you.
I don't see any more questions coming in.
Yeah, I don't either. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.